People are super excited because if these photos actually show Noah's Ark, then they can prove that everything that's written in the Bible about this whole event is actually true.
Here it is, a huge boat-shaped object sitting below the ground in the mountains of Ararat in Turkey.
Thousands of years ago, a massive flood engulfed the earth. It wiped out everything in its path, except for those who were inside a giant boat called Noah's Ark.
So the story of Noah is not an isolated event that only happens in the Bible. It's part of a bigger story.
This legendary ark is said to have saved humanity from near extinction. And guess what? It has been found. And this is not even the most surprising part of this new discovery. The area around the ark holds some evidence that scientists were not expecting at all. So what did they find, and where exactly is this supposed ark? Chapter 1, The Lost Ark. Thousands of years ago, the Bible tells us that God warned Noah about a massive flood that was going to wipe out everything evil on earth. So God told Noah to build a giant boat, called an ark, to save his family and pairs of animals. Noah spent 75 years building this boat, and then the flood came and swept everything with it. After 150 days of flooding, the ark supposedly landed on the mountains of Ararat in what's now eastern Turkey. So that's where the scientists decided to look for this ark. Finally, 5,000 years later, researchers think they have found the ark. Well, not exactly the ark, but some evidence that proves that the ark was there sometime in history. The researchers found signs of human activity near a boat-shaped formation in the mountains of Ararat. This was a big revelation. So researchers from universities in Turkey and the US started to work in the area to find more evidence. They have been busy for about a year digging around and analyzing rock and soil from the famous Durupinar Formation on Mount Ararat. This spot, which is in the Doğu Bayazıt district of Agri, is less than 2 miles from the Iran-Turkey border. It is a 538-foot-long feature made of limonite, and some locals believe it is the remains of Noah's Ark. Legend has it that Noah built a huge ark, about 150 meters long, to save pairs of every animal from a giant flood. According to the book of Genesis, the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. And with Mount Ararat standing at 16,500 feet and looking kind of like an ark, researchers are hopeful they have hit the right spot. Faruk Kaya is a professor at AKU who has been studying this area closely. He says the rocks and soil show signs of human activity dating back to the years right after the flood mentioned in Noah's story. But finding signs of human activity is not enough to prove the Bible story. Now is it? The Durupinar Formation has always been a famous spot for people searching for Noah's Ark for years. But even with all the hype, archaeologists have consistently said that this formation is natural, not a petrified shipwreck. Plus, there is no solid geological record of a global flood like the one in the Bible. Some think maybe there was a smaller local flood, but even that's up for debate. The researchers at Durupinar have found stuff like clayey materials, marine materials, and seafood in the geological formation. They think these findings might be important. Since 2021, they have been focusing more on this region, taking rock and soil samples from the highest peaks for lab analysis. They hope this might lead to more concrete evidence. We are still waiting for that. Noah's Ark has definitely fascinated people for ages. The search for real proof goes on. But for now, scientists are being careful. They say while the findings are interesting, they are not definitive proof that the Ark existed at the Durupinar site. This new evidence has definitely made the hunt for Noah's Ark more exciting. Now, scientists have better technology, and there are researchers working from different countries. They have uncovered things that might date back to the time of the flood story. But the experts are still saying that they need more proof. While we wait for more solid evidence, did you know there is already a modern ark present in the US? Why was it needed, and what's inside? Chapter 2, The Modern Ark. There is this man named Ken Ham who is an Australian Christian fundamentalist. Ham moved to the United States with a mission in his mind. He wanted to debunk evolution. He is a staunch believer that the Bible is a literal history book, and he has dedicated his life to promoting the idea that the universe is only about 6,000 years old. To get his message out there, he started an organization called Answers in Genesis. Ken Ham became famous when he created the Creation Museum in northern Kentucky. This place shows visitors that the Bible's account of history is true, evolution is a myth, and our moral decline is tied to believing otherwise. But Ham did not sit back and just watch after opening this museum. He had a bigger vision. Recently, he built a massive replica of Noah's Ark to draw even more visitors and spread his beliefs further. So just 45 minutes away from the Creation Museum, he built the Ark Encounter. This is a theme park that features a full-size Noah's Ark. This is a colossal structure built by Amish woodworkers, financed through donations, junk bonds, and tax rebates from Kentucky. The Ark has an animatronic Noah, lifelike models of animals that supposedly boarded the Ark 2x2, like bears, short-necked giraffes, and even juvenile Tyrannosaurus rexes. Ham and his team have created not just a gigantic landmark, but a powerful promotional tool for their version of Christian fundamentalism, known as Young Earth or Young Universe creationism. The Ark itself contains 132 bays. Each one of them is 18 feet high and spread across 3 decks. Visitors start on the lowest deck and move up through the Ark via ramps in the center. On the first deck, you will find models of animals that Answers in Genesis believes could have been on the Ark. These models represent kinds of animals that, according to AIG, gave rise to the modern animals we see today. The second deck has more animal models, dioramas of Noah's workshop, and a blacksmith. The third deck has displays that show what life might have been like inside and outside the Ark during the flood. Some bays even feature artifacts from the Green Collection. This is an interesting place to visit, which is why, every year, about 1.5 million people visit the Ark Encounter. And the park is always adding new attractions to keep things fresh. There is an indoor petting zoo, beautiful Christmas lights, and an aviary where you can see birds flying around. The park also focuses on behind-the-scenes projects, like hydroponic gardening and providing seasonal worker accommodations. While on one side, Ken Ham is promoting the Bible and its teachings, a recent discovery has been made that has once again shaken religious beliefs. So what has been discovered this time? Chapter 3, The Alternate Location. David Allen Deal is a famous author who had his own opinion about where Noah's Ark ended up. Forget Mount Ararat, which is the usual guess by most of the people. Deal says the Ark actually landed on Meshu or Mesha Mountain, which is about 17 miles south of Mount Ararat. In fact, he has pieced this together from old texts like the Epic of Gilgamesh in his own wordplay detective work. Deal is convinced the Ark first touched down at a high spot, around 7,400 feet up. Deal also thinks Noah and his family built the first city right there, calling it Mesha Naxwin. They supposedly used parts of the Ark to get started. But over time, stuff like earthquakes and rain made the Ark slide down the mountain, leaving marks along the way. Deal's idea is super detailed. He believes the flood survivors reused the Ark's wood to build their homes and used the tar for sealing roofs. The local place names seem to back him up too. Mesha means pulled out of the water, and Naxwan is thought to mean Noah's Zion. Plus, scientists have found an exciting detail on the mountain. They have found 2 peaks that look like a wall called the Wall of Heaven. This wall is mentioned in the Epic of Gilgamesh and is believed to be where Noah's Ark first landed. In the mid-90s, Deal went on an adventure to this area. He found old settlement sites and saw the Wall of Heaven at the high spot where he thinks the Ark originally landed. The names and features of the area seem to tell the Ark's story. Deal also dug into old pictures and statues showing characters from the Bible's Genesis story, especially focusing on Nama, who was linked to this mountain. He believes these ancient artworks connect to the Ark's story in the Bible. Deal's theory is seriously intriguing and full of details. But let's be real, it is just one of many ideas floating around about where Noah's Ark might have ended up. Even with all his evidence and solid reasoning, scientists are not fully convinced. They say that they need more studies and closer looks at everything before making any big claims. When it comes to ancient stories and beliefs, they have to be super careful and thorough. But the scientists believe it yet or not, Deal's take on the alternative location of Noah's Ark has sparked many debates. And this is not the first time Noah's Ark has stirred up controversy. Jewish and Christian traditions have been debating this story for what feels like forever. So what do Jewish traditions say about the Ark? Chapter 4, Christians versus Jews. Jews and Christians have always had different views about Noah's Ark. Both have their own takes on the story. They have different opinions, different theories, and different studies to prove them. First of all, let's get into the Christian perspective. Many Christians believe the story of Noah's Ark as it is told in the Bible's book of Genesis. According to this, Noah built an ark to save his family and pairs of every animal from a massive flood sent by God to wipe out wickedness on earth. Christians often see the ark as a symbol of God's judgment and mercy. Over the years, some Christian scholars have gone all out to find physical proof of the ark's existence. There have been numerous expeditions to Mount Ararat, with some explorers claiming to have found remnants of the ark. However, these claims are often controversial and lack solid evidence. For example, in the 1950s, French explorer Fernand Navarre claimed to have found a piece of wood high on Mount Ararat, which he said was part of the ark. While some Christians thought this was the proof they needed, scientists debunked it. They said that the wood was much younger than it needed to be to match the ark's timeline. Now, what's the Jewish perspective? In Judaism, the story of Noah's Ark is also significant, but is often interpreted more metaphorically. Many Jewish scholars see the Ark story as a moral lesson rather than a literal historical event. Jews focus more on ethical and spiritual lessons rather than hunting down physical evidence. There are also contemporary Jewish scholars who have debated the story's origins and its meanings. Some suggest that the flood story in Genesis was influenced by older Mesopotamian myths, like the Epic of Gilgamesh. This perspective leads to interesting discussions about how these ancient stories were adapted and integrated into Jewish tradition. Now let's talk about the modern debates. Both religious and secular scholars have been digging into the flood story, trying to figure out what's what. Some believe there was a real, massive flood in ancient times, but it might have been more localized rather than global. Geological studies have shown evidence of significant flooding in the ancient Near East, which could have inspired the story. For example, Robert Ballard, who is an underwater archaeologist famous for finding the Titanic, suggested that a great flood around the Black Sea area could have been the basis for the flood myths. His studies indicate that a massive and sudden flood happened there about 7,000 years ago, which might align with the timeline of Noah's story. Statements from scholars like Ballard have further sparked ongoing debates. Some Christian groups see these findings as potential proof of the biblical flood, while others argue it does not quite match the Bible's description. Jewish scholars, meanwhile, often take these studies in stride. They focus on the narrative's moral lessons rather than its historical accuracy. There are also interfaith dialogues where Jewish and Christian scholars come together to discuss their views on Noah's Ark. These discussions can get pretty heated, but they are also fascinating. They talk about how each tradition interprets the story, the different emphases on metaphor versus literal truth, and what each can learn from the other's perspective. So where does this leave us? Well, the debates between Jewish and Christian traditions about Noah's Ark are not going away anytime soon. What we can do is do our own research. Did you know many other cultures share the same story of a massive flood? Chapter 5, Stories from the Past. There have been many flood stories from around the world that all seem to tell a similar story to that of Noah's Ark. In fact, each culture has its own version of a massive, world-changing flood. Even though the details differ, the themes are strikingly similar. For example, we have the Eridu Genesis from Mesopotamia. This is one of the oldest flood stories out there and likely influenced other stories in the region, like the famous Epic of Gilgamesh and the Genesis flood story in the Hebrew Bible. Then moving over to China and Egypt, you will find flood stories featuring characters like Nuwa and the sun god Ra. These myths usually involve a handful of survivors who are either saved by the gods or have some divine task to restart the human race. Ancient Greece has a similar story with Deucalion and Pyrrha, who survive a flood in a chest that lands on a high mountain. Even in ancient Hawaii, there is a story of Nu building a big canoe to escape a flood, ending up on Mauna Kea. Now, the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is one of the oldest stories we know of, includes a flood narrative that is a lot like Noah's story. Both talk about gods deciding to wipe out humanity, and then they picked one family to survive, who built a huge boat and saved animals. But there are some differences too. In Noah's story, he survives because he is a righteous man. In the Gilgamesh story, Utnapishtim survives because he is wise and favored by the gods. Another ancient story is the Atrahasis epic, which was discovered in the 19th century. It is even older than the Gilgamesh story and shares many elements with both Gilgamesh and the Genesis flood story. These include the gods being angry, the survivors building a boat and starting over after a giant flood. Both the Atrahasis and Genesis stories mention getting a 7-day warning about the flood, building a boat, and sending out birds to find dry land. All these stories from all different places and times speak about the power of the gods, the survival of a few, and the idea of a fresh start after a disaster. It is pretty clear that the concept of a great flood wiping out the world and starting anew is something many cultures have pondered and shared. But is this story even true? And does the ark really exist in this world? Chapter 6. Does this ark really exist? Noah's Ark is one of those stories that everyone seems to know. It is the story of how God got so fed up with humanity that he decided to flood the earth, wiping out almost everyone except for Noah, his family, and pairs of all animals, who rode out the storm in a massive wooden boat. For those who take the Bible as literal history, finding the ark would be the ultimate proof. This has led to numerous expeditions to places like Mount Ararat in Armenia, where the ark is said to have come to rest. But is there any solid evidence that the ark actually existed? Back in 1876, a British politician named James Bryce climbed Mount Ararat and claimed to have found a piece of wood that he believed came from the ark. More recently, in the 1940s, an optometrist said he spotted the ark in a rock formation on the mountain. And in the early 2000s, some evangelical pastors claimed to have found petrified wood at the peak. These stories pop up fairly often, but they are usually met with skepticism from serious archaeologists and biblical scholars. Jody Magnus, who is an archaeologist and National Geographic explorer, is pretty clear on this. She says that no legitimate archaeologist does this. Archaeology is not treasure hunting. Archaeologists have to come up with research questions and answer them through excavation. According to her, modern searches for Noah's Ark are not based on scientific methods, but more on a desire to find something that aligns with a specific belief. So are these flood stories based in any sort of reality? Eric Klein, another National Geographic explorer and an archaeologist at George Washington University, says there is some geological evidence for a major flood in the Black Sea region about 7,500 years ago. But scientists don't agree on how extensive that flood was and whether it matches the scale described in the Bible. Klein suggests that floods have happened in different places at different times, and these events naturally became part of the world's oral and written lore. One of the big challenges is the ambiguity in the Hebrew Bible itself. The book of Genesis says the ark came to rest upon the mountains of Ararat, which could refer to a range of peaks in the ancient kingdom of Urartu. This area now includes parts of Armenia, Turkey, and Iran. So pinpointing the exact location of Noah's Ark based on this description is pretty tough. Magnus and Klein both agree that even if artifacts from the ark were found, there would be no way to conclusively link them to the historical events described in the Bible. Magnus pointed out that we have absolutely no way of placing Noah if he really existed, and the flood, if there really was one, in time and space. The only possible way to confirm it would be finding an ancient inscription, but even then, it might refer to a different Noah or a different flood. Despite the skepticism from the scientific community, the search for Noah's Ark continues to be popular among young Earth creationists who believe the Earth is only a few thousand years old. Groups like Answers in Genesis use archaeological evidence selectively to support their literal interpretation of the Bible. Andrew A. Snelling, who is a geologist with Answers in Genesis, admits that they don't expect the Ark to have survived 4,350 years. He believes Noah's family dismantled it for building materials after the flood. For archaeologists like Magnus, the obsession with finding Noah's Ark can overshadow real archaeological discoveries that provide valuable insights into the ancient world. She argues that these fruitless searches confuse the public and diminish excitement about genuine finds, such as evidence of the House of David. Eric Klein also believes that they are not Indiana Jones. He says that they are having fun. It is a whole procedure and they have to do it scientifically. Klein has spent years trying to debunk the so-called biblical evidence, but eventually decided to focus on his own research and educating those open to scientific results. He is currently excavating an 18th century BC Canaanite palace in northern Israel, which, while not as sensational as Noah's Ark, offers crucial insights into international relations from almost 4,000 years ago. So will we ever find Noah's Ark? Probably not. But that does not mean this story holds no significance. It is a religious heritage. It has left a legacy. What legacy exactly? Chapter 7, The Legacy of the Ark. The story of Noah's Ark is a symbol of hope and faith that still means a lot to many people today. After 40 days and nights of non-stop rain, Noah, his family, and all those animals were saved by God. For many, this story is a huge reminder that no matter how bad things get, help is on the way. For Christians, the Ark is all about God's promise. It shows that even when things look really bad, there is always a chance for a new beginning. In Judaism, the story of the Ark teaches some big moral lessons. They believe it is a call to live a good life, be righteous, and trust in God. The story shows that God is fair and will take care of those who follow him. Muslims also hold Noah in high regard. The Quran tells the story of the Ark and talks about God's mercy and the importance of staying faithful. According to Muslims, if you stick with God, you will be rewarded no matter how tough things get. But the Ark's legacy goes beyond just religious teachings. It is a symbol of human strength and the idea that we can start fresh after facing tough times. The story has been retold in books, movies, and TV shows, each one reinforcing its timeless message of survival and new beginnings. The Ark reminds us that no matter what kind of flood we are facing, whether it is a real disaster or a tough situation in life, there is always hope for a better tomorrow. It is a story that crosses religious lines and offers inspiration to anyone who believes in second chances. So whenever you are feeling down or like you are stuck in a storm, remember the Ark. It is a sign that help is out there, and you can come out stronger on the other side. All these stories that have been revolving around the world since ages and share very similar details. But there has been a discovery that suggests that some part of the story is completely wrong. What exactly has been discovered to claim this? Chapter 8, Challenging the Story. Leonard Simmons was a British pilot back then. He found an ancient tablet while he was serving in Iraq. According to him, the tablet described the Ark not as the big wooden ship we all imagine, but as a round boat. Yes, a round boat. This tablet suggests that the story of the Ark might have been influenced by even older Mesopotamian flood stories. In these stories, boats were often round, like giant life rafts. This is a huge shift from the classic image we have of the Ark, thanks to the Bible's descriptions. Simmons's find added to the growing pile of archaeological evidence that makes us rethink what we know about the Ark. It suggests that the story might have borrowed elements from other ancient cultures. This is not to say the story is not meaningful, but it does show how myths and legends can evolve and mix over time. This round boat idea aligns more closely with descriptions from the Epic of Gilgamesh, where a boat is built to survive a massive flood. The similarities between these stories are hard to ignore, which tells us that the tale of Noah's Ark might be part of a bigger web of ancient flood narratives. These discoveries don't necessarily disprove the story of Noah's Ark, but they do challenge us to look at it from a new angle. They remind us that history is complex, and our understanding of ancient stories can change with new evidence. It also teaches us that we need to keep our minds open and appreciate how different cultures might have shared and shaped these epic tales. So next time you think of Noah's Ark, imagine not just a giant ship, but maybe a round boat too. What do you think is more believable, a round boat or a giant ship? Where do you think this ship might be present right now? Share your opinions with us in the comments below. If you want more mysteries uncovered, go ahead and like this video and subscribe to the channel, because we have got a lot more of this. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.